Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to this tutorial or webinar on designing for UV print. Hopefully you guys can see the little chat window on your right hand side. I believe it's on your right hand side. If somebody could type a little message in there and let me know that you can hear me okay, that would be great. Hi Chaz, yep, somebody's popped up there, brilliant. Is the audio volume okay from your end? I can tweak it my end if not. And you should be able to see a white screen as well, just saying welcome to designing for UV print. Okay, so Karen says it's all good, brilliant. If at any point the volume does go too high or too low, just let me know and I can tweak that this end. You do get a small bit of lag in webinars, especially when I'm going to be sharing my desktop. This is just because it's a live feed, so sometimes it can take a little while to sort of catch up. Hopefully you've had a minute just to familiarize yourself with the layout of the webinar. So in effect, basically I'll be sort of sharing my screen as I talk to you through a bunch of different aspects to do with designing for UV print, and most of the time will be spent in Adobe Illustrator. Feel free to use this little chat box on the right hand side here to ask any questions. If I see them pop up whilst I'm talking, I'll answer them there and then. And if possible, if not, what I'll do is just sort of flag them, and then at the end of the webinar, we'll come back to them all. We'll pop them all up on the screen and we'll talk through them all together because they might be quite relevant for all of you. So as I said, feel free to use the chat box. Have a look around your screen. There should be a few other different options and things that you can click on. It looks a little bit different to mine, so I can't tell you exactly where, but there should be some bits and bobs on your screen. We should be looking at around about an hour for this webinar, maybe a little less, depending on how we get on. Maybe a little bit more. There's quite a lot to get through, I guess. So a little introduction to myself as well, for those of you that don't know me. My name's Joe, and I look after the Academy here at Roland DG. And I've got a bit of a passion for the UV printers, and I love all of the amazing things that they can do. But it's kind of down to your design and what you actually send to the printers that kind of makes them the magic printers that they are. So I don't know if you guys have machines or not, or if you're just interested, or if you have machines currently. But if you do have machines, you could pop it up in the chat window there, just so I've got a bit of an idea as to what devices you have or what information you'd like to cover. A lot of the design stuff that we'll be going through, I'm probably going to be referring to our LEF range quite a lot, just because it's an easier product to talk about. So just going to write a little message here again. Check you can all hear me. So as I said, I'll be referring to the LEF range a little bit, but everything that I'm talking about will be relevant for the whole of the UV range. So meaning any of the Versa UV products that we offer, be that the LEF 12i, the LEF 200, LEF 300, the S series, which are a new set of printers, which are all large flatbed or belt-driven devices. The Versa UV LEC, which are print and cut UV devices, and the Versa UV LEJ 640, which is a hybrid roll-to-roll and flatbed device. So nobody else is commenting on the audio, so I hope it's all good. As I said, if any of you guys can just pop a little something in that chat window to say that you're there and that you can hear me okay. If not, we'll crack on. There we go. Yep, brilliant. Okay. Sorry, it's a bit strange when you're talking to yourself. Can't always see that somebody's there. So that's a little introduction. First of all, we're going to take a look at sort of workspaces and spot color libraries, so the sort of setup for your programs, and I'm going to do that in Illustrator. So let's just jump over to Illustrator. Now, hopefully you can see my monitor now, so you should be able to see my Illustrator home screen. So I've just jumped into Illustrator and I've created a new document. So as I said, there might be a bit of lag in this. So if you are following my mouse movements, it might just take a little bit to catch up. So I'm going to go to File, New, and when you open up this new window, your most recent items will pop up, and you've got a box on the right hand side here to set up the default settings for your artboards or for the document that you're going to be working with. So the document that I have open here is 770 by 330 millimeters, which is actually the bed size of the LEF 300. 2 seconds. Sorry, just checking that you guys can see what I'm seeing here. Yeah, it's the bed size of the LEF 300. So if I'm designing an artboard, it can be quite useful to keep the artboard the same size as the device that you're going to be using, or the output that you're going to be using. So say, for example, I am designing for an LEF range, so an LEF 300, LEF 200, then I might design my artboard to be the exact size of the bed, so that when I export in the PDF format, the design that I'm using will be exactly the same size. I'll come back to this again later, so hopefully it all makes sense. You can, however, create any old page space, any old artboard size that you want, and then edit it later as well. You could also create templates or presets. So if instead of going to New, I go to File, New from Template, I've got a set of templates that will come with the computer, or you can create your own as well. So now that I've created this artboard, and I could go to Save as Template and edit my own templates. So I could create a template called LEF 300 printable bed area, or A3 canvas, or whatever template you like, and then that will just save time next time when you're designing for the same process. So right, sorry guys, just realized that you can still only see the welcome screen. Bear with me a moment then. That better? You guys should now be able to see my Illustrator controls. Sorry about that. I had the chat window minimized, so I didn't see you guys talking there. Right, so as I was just explaining, the layout for your templates for your files, you can create those by creating a new document. When you create a new document, you open your window, this little window here for a new document window, and on the right hand side, choose the size of your document. You can choose to name your document, so let's just call this one UV print file, and you can choose some more advanced options down the bottom here, such as the color mode. I'm going to stick with CMYK for this one, and we'll come back to this a bit later. So once I've created my document, you can see that the white space that I have here is my art, and it's the same size as the printable area for the LEF 300, which is 770 by 330 millimeters. And at the top here, hopefully you can see the file name. It's just called UV print file. So I've opened up my document. If this is a common file format that you tend to use, or a common layout, then what you could do is go to the top left and go to Save as Template. And you could name it, this one's called UV print file. There's a template file. And I could save that anywhere where I have some access. And that could be my future template. So next time I need to create a new document, I can just use a previous template that I've saved before. But I'm going to use this one that I've just created. So here we have a blank artboard. I could also make more artboards. So say, for example, I needed to make multiple pages of a design. I could create additional artboards within the same workspace. So as I said, this is the full printable bed. I could go to the bottom left here there is a little icon that says Artboard tool. The shortcut for which is Shift and O. So if I click on that and go to the top to New Artboard, now you can see I've just created an identical artboard to the right of my previous one. The more artboards I make, then the more pages if I export it as a PDF. So I'm just going to delete that one and go back to my individual artboard. Now in terms of your actual workspace and your layout, let's just minimize this a sec. In terms of your artboard and your layout, everybody will have their own preference as to which parts of the software sit where. By default, when you open up an Illustrator document, on the left-hand side you'll have a toolbar with a number of little icons on it, and if you hover over any of those icons, they'll tell you what the icons do, and they'll also tell you the shortcut for that icon on your keyboard. Shortcuts are great for speeding up your design processes. By default, you'll have the top one selected, which is the selection tool, and the shortcut for which is V. Now on the right-hand side, depending on what version of Illustrator you're using, you'll have a properties box, such as the one that I have here. This is quite new to one of the newer versions of Illustrator, or CC, in that if I create any content, so let's just say, for example, we'll create some text. Just a moment, do that again. Text, if I create some text, enlarge that so you can see it, then on the right hand side in my properties box, by default it's changed to the type tool with all of the correct settings and quick access tools for paragraph, character, appearance, free form, transform, and type, because I've created some type in the middle here. If, for example, I change and I go to the brush tool, on the right hand side now it's gone to the brush options palette as well. So that's really useful. That's quite a newish feature for Adobe CC. And you can see that there's a few other windows that I have open here, which are just my preferred presets for how I like to lay out my workspace. So I always like to have my Swatches palette open for quick access to colors. My layers tool, layers palettes, because it's always good to split your information into relevant layers. And then I have my Pathfinder tool, which again can be very useful for merging shapes together when creating underlays of white, for example, or overlays of gloss for a UV device. When you're happy with the layout of your window, you can go to the Window tab at the top here, and you could actually go to the bottom and scroll down a little bit further. Sorry, back up the top. Under Workspaces, you can see that the one that I have selected is Joe Print Setup. So that's the default arrangement that I like to have when I'm creating print files. Now, down the bottom is New Workspace or Reset, or I could make some changes and then save my workspace. So go to New Workspace and save it as whatever you like. And then you could have multiple setups for different processes, for editing photos, for example, or for creating text, or using spot colors for UV, whatever it might be. So using your workspaces can be very useful. And there's also a set of predetermined workspaces here which you can choose from as well. The default of which I think is Essentials. That's the one that tends to open up when you first open up a document if you haven't made any changes before. So you can see I'm on Joe Print Setup under my workspaces. If there's any additional windows that I need, then I can open these via this Window tab at the top by choosing any of the options here. So you can see that I've got the Gradient tool, Layers, Pathfinder, Properties, and Swatches, and the control bar along the top. So if you should accidentally close any of the windows and you want to get them back, then these are a way you come to access those windows. So first of all, I'm just going to delete this text in the middle, and I'm going to talk through importing the Roland spot color libraries. So These libraries come with any of the devices, any of the Roland printers that you would purchase. And when you install VersaWorks onto a computer, these spot color libraries are installed on your computer for you. So all you would need to do is go to the computer on which you have VersaWorks installed and open up a Finder Explorer window. Now, if I go to my local drive, so I go onto my local disk C drive, and if I go into Program Files, x86, you can see here Roland VersaWorks Dual. So I've got the program files that were installed when I installed VersaWorks Dual. Inside of there, if I go to Swatches, I've got Swatches for Coral and I've got Swatches for Illustrator. So I'm going to go into Illustrator, and there's a default set of Roland spot color libraries. Now the ones that we're going to use today for UV print are going to be the top one, the Roland Color Systems library. The second one, which is called the Graypack Brio Coat library. I'm just going to hold the Control key to select multiple libraries. The second to bottom one, which is the Texture Systems library, and Roland VersaWorks. So we've got 4 libraries in total, and I'm going to copy these. Now I need to go back to my local disk, so back to my C drive, and I'm going to go into Program Files this time, and into the Adobe Program Files. So these are the setup files for my Adobe packages. You can see I've got Illustrator and Photoshop, so I'm going to go into Adobe Illustrator CC. And we're going to be installing these swatches as presets for the software. So I'm going to go into Presets. There's only one folder in there, which is ENGB for me. And in there we have a palette called Swatches, sorry, a folder called Swatches. And then you can either directly paste your Roland swatches in here, or you can create a new subfolder in here if you like to. So I'm actually just going to paste them. So paste. Okay, you need to have administrator rights to be able to make changes. So now I've got the Roland Color Library, Graypack Brio Coat Library, Texture Systems Library, and the Roland VersaWorks swatches. So now I can leave this space and go back into Illustrator, and I now want to open up these different libraries that I've created. So I'm going to go to my swatches palette, and to the little drop down list in the corner, not opening it up for some reason. Okay, we can access it via the window tab at the top here, Swatch Libraries at the bottom. And then on the right hand side you can see we've got the Roland Color Library and the other ones as well. So let's start off with the Color Library and open that. Didn't like me creating that just then. With me. Didn't like that, did it? Hold on a moment. Okay, got it. Let's just close Illustrator and reset it in a moment. Could be that I just paste the files and it just needs to redo that. So bear with me a moment. Changes, no. These are my files that I had open. Are you guys all following so far? Anything you want me to slow down on, or anything you've missed so far? Whilst we just wait for Illustrator to reopen there, just because I changed the route of where those swatches were in my drive, I'm just going to reload, so hopefully that refreshes. And you can see these were the last files that I was working with, so I'm going to open up a few of these. Just give that a moment. Some of these files are quite large that I was working on earlier, so I'm going to open these up because they've got lots of different UV information on them, and we'll talk through those in a minute. All right, it's just opening up my file here. There we go. As I said, this is a really large file that I was playing around with earlier. So let's just replace the links in this one. Okay, and we'll open up again. Let's go new from template and use the template that I was using earlier. Oh, that's saved under my local drive, isn't it? Oh, just a moment. Custom one. Hello there. 300. Create a new one. Okay. So now we can go back to our swatches. Open from Swatch Library. Roland VersaWorks. Here we go. Now they should all be working. So this one's the Roland VersaWorks swatch, which has as a default within it the cut contour, which you can use for any of the Roland devices which have a cut facility. We've got RDG_white in capitals, which is the spot color you use for generating white data. RDG_gloss for creating any gloss or matte print data. We've got a metallic swatch for any devices. Some of our eco-solvent devices have metallic silver. And we've also got RDG_primer, which is for any of the LEF or UV devices which have a built-in primer function as well. So also going to open up the other swatch library. So let's go for the color systems library. Let's just make this a little bit bigger for you. And the other two as well. So the Grey Pack Brio Coat and the texture systems library. Okay, so now we've got all of these open. You don't just have to use these swatches as well. You can create your own mixture of color palettes by creating your own swatch libraries. You know, if there's certain colors that you use all the time, certain sets of Pantone colors, for example, or you know, you have a favorite set of CMYK value colors that you want to create your own subfolders or mixtures of in your own swatch palettes, you can save your own swatch palettes as well. Now that you know where these swatch palettes for VersaWorks are kept, you can also send these to customers. So say, for example, I have a LEC 330, which is one of our print and cut UV devices, and I want to be able to create designs myself, but I also want my customers to be able to create any special effects like gloss or matte or white themselves. I could send them these swatches and they can use them, and then when the files come through to me, I can bring them straight into my RIP, say VersaWorks, and all of the data will be there ready to go, saving me time on creating all the design data myself. So you can see all the different swatch libraries up here, and you can actually go to the little drop down list. If I go to medium thumbnail or large thumbnail view on the drop down list, it's just going to make my previews a little bit bigger, which should make this better for you guys who are watching at home. And on the Roland color systems library, I tend to prefer to get these in a list, because then we can see what the actual color names are. So if I get a small list view, you can see that all the color names here are all listed, so it's a bit easier to find them. And there is a search facility at the top of this bar as well, should you be searching for a specific Roland color when you're using this palette. So if I create some swatches now, or some shapes, for example, so I'm just going to use the pen tool to create a sort of zigzag shape over here. There we go. And I want to use my Roland spot color library. First of all, I can just come into here and I'm going to choose let's use this green swatch here. This green swatch is called RVW PR12 K. Now, hopefully you guys know about the Roland Spot Color Library and how this relates to your printer. So if not, I'm just going to jump over into VersaWorks Dual. Now, any of you that are using VersaWorks to run your devices, if I go to the Media tab on the top left, top of the menu panel here, you'll see that there's a color chart called Color Chart Type 1. If I click on this and click on OK, that will come into my queue. As you can see, I'm using the LEF 300 here. And if I open up this file, this is all of the colors from that. This is all of the colors from that color chart, color swatch that I have in Illustrator. So if I print this file out using my device, and then I use all of the swatches, I can then relate the two identically to each other. So if, for example, this was the green that I was after, this one is PR16H. So when I printed this, I'll have a printed example of the color. And then when I'm in Illustrator, I can go to PR16H. There we go. And that will marry up perfectly to the print that I had before, so we know what colors to expect. You could print out different versions of this chart, for example, and send those to you if you wanted them to be able to match up colors themselves. So I can assign spot colors from my spot color library. Now, if I jump into either the Graypack Brio Coat library or the Texture Systems library, let's make this a little bit bigger for you. You'll be able to see that if I select any of these swatches, the infill of my shape is filled in with these swatches. Now, by default, they've got this sort of swatch name written across them. When you actually print those, they won't come up. So it will just be the pattern that you can see in the background. So, for example, here we've got a sort of zebra kind of pattern, overlapping circles, stars, cross hatches, stripes, those kind of things. And if I jump back into the Graypack Brio Coat library, there's kind of more of the same, lots of different textures. So if I printed this image that you can see on the screen at the moment, using this swatch that I have there, the text wouldn't come out, but all of these little circles would be imported into VersaWorks as gloss data. So gloss data can be printed either matte or gloss, and you can build them up in layers to create a depth to your prints as well. So, for example, on the LEF 300, if I printed this file, I could choose the emboss setting, which would print 15 layers or up to 15 layers of gloss where these spots are, giving me a really high raised texture print. So you can use these swatches to add effects to different images or to certain parts of designs. All you need to have is some kind of a shape, and you can fill it with these different swatches. You could then have graphic data that sits underneath, for example. So let's say I've got a star. It's going to go to my shapes tool over here. And I've got a star that's going to be orange. There we go. Now, I'm actually going to start using my layers because now I'm going to start working with gloss data. I want to try and use my layers as best as possible. So I tend to always create layers for the different parts of information within my design, which just helps keep things organized. It means that you can turn off other layers and see specific information as well. And should anybody else need to get access to your design file, it'll be quicker and easier if they can see how you've created your designs. So I'm going to call my layer 1 color. So I can tell that that's going to be where all my color data is going to go. And I'm now going to create a new layer, layer 2. But I'm going to call this one gloss. Okay. And I'm going to take a copy, so edit, copy or Control C of this star. And then I'm going to go onto my gloss layer, and I'm actually going to turn off the layer underneath just to make this really obvious. And I'm going to go to Edit, Paste in Place. Okay, so it's going to put it back in exactly the same place as where the star is underneath. But this one, for the fill, I'm going to choose one of my texture swatches. So I'm going to choose the star one, which has got lots of little stars, as you can see. So if I now turn on the layer underneath, I've now got an orange star, which has got loads of tiny little gloss stars on top of it. And if I print that, I can choose to print the orange first and then print all these little gloss stars on top, and I can choose how many layers I'm going to print with it. So it's a really easy system to use, and you can use this for text, shapes, or anything along those lines. Hopefully that all makes sense in terms of using the different spot color libraries. As a couple of reminders there, you can open these swatches and you can send them to people as well, should other people want to design with them. You can choose any shape to be filled with any of these gloss swatches, and the text that you see will not come out. It will just be the graphic data underneath. And just another note, actually, that when you've got these libraries open, if you want them to stay on your workspace, so when you close Illustrator and then reopen it, if you just go to the little drop-down menu that's on the side of any of your palettes and select the bottom option there, Persistent, it means that next time I come in, all of these palettes will still be here. So I'm going to select Persistent for all of these because this is my workspace for designing for my Roland output. So now I've got all of these libraries which are default in my working space. So hopefully that's a bit of an overview into using the default swatches. Now you can also create your own. So I created my own gloss texture swatch. So if I go to open recent, it should already be open in here. There we go, Joe texture swatches. So I just followed a little YouTube tutorial on how to create my own pattern. So it's very simple to do. You create the data in a design file, and then you can go to save as a pattern. I can't remember exactly how I did it, but if you follow a little YouTube tutorial on how to create a pattern, and I just made sure that all of my data was either inside of a square, or where if it was on the edge of a square, if I put another one next to it, that the image is tessellated, so that they move between the squares. So this is my swatch here, and if I go to large thumbnail view, you might be able to see it a little bit better there. It says new pattern swatch. So again, if I create that as my fill, and I go back to creating the star, you'll see that my star is filled with skulls. So it's just creating a test, and you can see that they all marry up perfectly regardless of what shape I make. So you have those default swatches which have lots of textures in, but you can also create your own, maybe a specific logo, or if you really like a certain pattern that you tend to use a lot in your designs, you can create your own image using that swatch. Make sure it's using the gloss RDG_gloss swatch, and you can save that as a pattern and use that within any of your future designs. So I can save this pattern or this swatch and move it about into other folders as well, or other files. Okay. So if we go back to my other document here, it's going to delete some of the data. We can start again and just make my view back to the default at the top here as well. First of all, I'm just going to go back to talking about using white and gloss in a bit more of a basic sense. So we'll first of all look at creating flood fills for graphics. So say, for example, I'm going to create a really basic shape here. So I'm going to create a rectangle, a red rectangle. I'm going to create a brown circle, and let's go for a polygon as well. And let's make this one yellow. Okay, I'm just putting a bit of an overlap between these as well. So at the moment, I accidentally drew all of this on my gloss layer I've just seen. So what I'm going to do is cut it all. So Control X or Edit Cut. And I'm going to go back onto my color layer and paste them in there. Okay, so I'm going to remember to split my data into the relevant layers. So this is my logo or my design. If I want to put white as an underlay, I'm going to select all of the information. So you can draw a selection arrow around it all. And I'm going to go to Control C again. So I've copied all the data, or edit, copy. And I'm going to create a new layer. Because I've got a color layer and I've got a gloss layer, but now I'm going to create a white layer. And I'm going to turn off the other layers so I can see only the data that I'm working with. And paste in place, I'm going to paste the information onto my new layer. Now this is a really simple shape, so this is a very easy process, but this should just get you used to the idea of merging shapes together to create an underlay for another set of graphic data. So I'm going to highlight all of these now, and using my Pathfinder tool, which was one of the windows that I had open on my home screen here, I've got the first option there, which is two little grey squares overlapping, and if I hover over it, it says Unite. Alt-click to create a compound shape and add shape area. So if I just click on it, what it's going to do is merge my three shapes together to become one single shape, which is perfect because now it's got a single fill. It actually used the top color in my layers, which was the yellow. And if I now select my white spot color instead of the yellow, I've now got a white fill that perfectly matches up to the design underneath. I'd probably also turn off my stroke or create my stroke as white as well on that one. So now if I turn on the layer underneath and I turn off my white layer, and if I flick between the two, you should be able to see that they line up perfectly. White in Illustrator is shown by this grey color because it stands out a lot more than if you were using a white color, because you wouldn't be able to see it in the design space often. So now you can see I've got my white data. Now my white layer is actually on top of my color layer, which is good because it improves sort of visibility within file structures when you export out of Illustrator. So the fact that I'm actually going to print this white data underneath the color doesn't really matter because I would choose that within VersaWorks. So VersaWorks chooses the printing order of special information such as white. So I've got a white layer and I've got a color layer. If I just turn off my white layer, let's say for example now that I want to print the red information that I can see here in gloss. I'm going to select the red and I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to go over to my gloss layer and I'm going to turn off the layer underneath again, and I'm going to paste in place. Okay, so if I now select this and make the fill gloss, and I turn on the other layers, what you might notice is that it's actually going to print the whole of this rectangle in gloss, rather than what was visibly red previously, because before there was part of it missing from this brown circle. So unlike color, with normal color, if you put a CMYK, so 100% white or 0% color on top of a color, printers know not to put any color there. But with spot colors or special colors, such as the gloss or the white, you actually need to take the data away. So what I'm going to do is copy this brown circle as well. So Control C, and I'm going to go back into my gloss layer, and I'm going to paste on top of the other one. Now I'm going to select the two shapes, and I'm going to use the second option in my Pathfinder tool, which says minus front. So my brown circle is on top of my rectangle, and I'm going to say minus front, which is going to use it, like a stamp to punch out from the other one. Now if I turn on all my layers, you can see that the gloss is now the correct shape of the red shape. And if I turn off the other layers, you can see it on its own. The white is the same as the three shapes, and the color is all there on its own. So that's a really common way of using white as a flood fill or an underlay to go underneath color data. And you can choose which color data you want to have white underneath, or you can have it as a flood like that. Now that works exactly the same for gloss. Gloss could be used as a fill to go over areas, or it can be used to just pick up certain highlights or certain areas of a design. So that's what we're going to look at next. How to sort of get more useful information or different information from your gloss and white. So I'm going to open up an image, I think. So let's go to open and let's find an image quickly. So let's go with something that's got a bit of contrast in it. Let's go with this one. So you guys all following so far? Being quite quiet in the chat box over there, just checking. So I've opened up this image. It's a picture of Big Ben. And let's say, for example, now, so this is raster information, as in it's a photo. So I'm just going to show you how we could create white information out of a photo. Okay, so I've imported a bitmap image, as in if I zoom in, you'll be able to see that this is an image built up of pixels. Okay, so it's not a vector-based design. Now we've just been working with vectors, but now we're going to work with a bitmap. So what I'm going to do is duplicate my layer. So instead of creating a new layer and copying information, I'm just going to duplicate layer 1, which gives me exactly the same information on 2 layers. I'm going to turn off the bottom layer. Now the layer on top, I'm going to name white, because we're going to convert this into white information. So if I go to edit, in the edit menu at the top, edit colors, and then go to convert to grayscale, what you should hopefully see with the image is that we've just converted it to black and white. So what it effectively is lots of different gradients and layers of black ink. So if in my fill down here we have a look at the fill color, it's got a question mark because it's lots of different gradients of black or gray. If I now just select my white ink swatch, if you keep an eye on the screen, you should see that the color kind of changes because it's gone from black to my spot color white, which is shown by a gray in Illustrator. So what's happened now is actually that's the whole photo printed in white ink. So if we have a look where the darker areas are of my image, that would be closer now to 100% white, and where the lighter areas are would be closer to 0% white. So if I actually wanted to invert this and make it the other way around so that the lighter areas of my image were going to be printed with white ink, I could again just go back to edit colors and go to invert colors. And now you can see the darker areas of the image will be printed with more white ink. So instead of me putting a flood fill within something, you can actually print full gradients using your swatches from either a photo or from a vector as well. So that's a photo printed with white ink. Now, just above this to show you, I'm going to create a rectangle, which at the moment is 100% white ink. Okay. Now, if I go down to my gradient tool, which I'm just going to bring out so you can see and show you the options for it. If I now select the default gradient, you'll see that my gradient in the middle of my screen, make it a little bit bigger, is going from black to white. Now I can change the colors of my gradient any way I like. I could start putting color into my gradient. Just to show you briefly, let's go to let's get some color a moment. Let's get some rolling colors. So let's make my gradient go from yellow. Oops, need to select my gradient in a minute. Sort of greeny yellow down to, let's choose another color here. Purple. There we go. So now you can see my gradient goes from yellow to purple. What I'm going to do, similar to how I just changed both ends of my gradient, I'm actually going to drag my white or my gloss swatch. So let's go for gloss this time. And I'm going to drag it into my gradient over the yellow and over the purple. So what I've now effectively got is a gradient going from 100% gloss to 100% gloss, so it looks solid. But if I grab one end of my gradient and select it in my gradient tool and change the opacity to 0%, what I've now got is a gradient going from 100% gloss on the right hand side to 0% gloss on the left hand side. So if I printed that on my UV device using the gloss, and I printed 10 layers, for example, and then I looked at my print side on, what I would actually have within my print side on would be something like this, where on the right hand side would be 10 layers of 100%, and on the left hand side would be 10 layers of 0%. So I get this smooth gradient between the two ends. So this is a way of creating more textures within your work, and you can use this for white or for gloss. For gloss, obviously, this is going to add relief and texture to your prints, and for white, you can start to create some really interesting work by putting 100% white, onto a clear background to make a color stand out more, or we could put 100% white onto, say, a sort of silver material, a nice shiny material. And if you put down white, it's going to block out the amount of silver that would shine through. So then we can start to play around with, how much color comes through, or how much the material look comes through. So that's a gradient for gloss. I can easily change it just by dragging my white color swatch over the gloss ones instead to create a white gradient. And as you can see with this image of the Big Ben, the House of Parliament, I've actually made that with white, sorry. And if I go to the white swatch now and change it for gloss, it's exactly the same thing. So if I zoom in on Big Ben up here, you can see that all of the lighter areas of this design will now be printed with more gloss ink, and all the lighter areas darker areas less. So if I printed this with lots of layers of emboss, what I'd actually get is relief or an impression of the design parts of that tower raised off from my image using the clear ink. And I could print that with matte finish or with gloss finish. So hopefully that makes sense to all of you. Hopefully you sort of get the idea of being able to use an image and being able to create gradients. Now, I created a few designs. Here's one. I'm just going to show you a picture, show you an example. Hopefully you can see that picture of what looks like some water sat on a printer. Now that's actually, zoom in a little bit, that's layers of gloss printed with a gradient on them so that they've got a round edge to make this print look like it actually had water sat on top. And the way that I did that, you can see on this print here. This is the design file. Now I've made gloss red in this instance so that it stands out a little bit more for showing you. But if I look at one of these shapes, you can see that in the middle it's 100% gloss, and towards the edge it's starting to fade out. So you can either do that by, for example, let's create a circle and use your gradient tool. So let's fill my swatch with gloss, but use my gradient. Instead of having a linear gradient, I'm going to go to radial. And again, I'm going to go through the same process of applying the gloss swatches and making one end of it 0%. And what I can also do is actually sort of open up the tools of my gradient and make it have a nice soft edge. Let's just turn off the stroke on that. So now you can see that I've got 100% gloss in the middle and a 0% gloss on the outside. So if I print this in lots of layers, from the side, what it would end up looking like is different to that previous gradient that I showed. It would look something like this from the side, because we'd have 100% gloss in the middle, and then it would start fading towards the edge, which is more like what water would look like if it was actually sat on a surface. Hence why in that preview picture here, That's why we've got nice soft edges on this gloss that looks like a water print. Just to show you some other examples of this as well. Now let's go back to that design file. You can see this was a design file where I've actually got some of the swatches, the default Swatch Library swatches on top of color and on top of black to show how they look slightly different. Got gloss on top of the water droplets. If you have a look at this top part here, you can see that this image looks like it's actually a pair of lips, and you can see that there's some gloss which is using red in this image. If I move it out of the way, it'll make a bit more sense. There we go. To highlight some pink makeup in this design. Now, instead of using the whole image to create a grayscale and then create gloss information, the way that you can do something like that is to use Photoshop instead of Illustrator. So if I just jump over into Photoshop a minute, hopefully you can all see a green racing car. So this is the image that I'm going to use for this example. And in Photoshop, instead of using a spot color to fill sort of vector data, because this is a bitmap software, we're actually going to create a spot channel within the file. But first of all, we need to select some information that we want to become gloss. So an easy way of doing that would be to go, I'm going to go to select color range. And I'm going to select the green within the file. So this is going to show in this preview up here the color range that it's selecting in the middle. So if I drag the fuzziness up and down, hopefully you can see in that little preview window that it's selecting more or less of the image. So let's go to somewhere about there and click on OK. You'll see that it's going to make a selection on my window there. If I now go to the bottom right of my Photoshop window and I go to channels, you can see that this is an RGB image. So at the moment it's selecting the different RG and B channels. Now if I go to the drop down list and go to new spot channel, you'll see that I've done this before, but the name by default has come up with RDG _ gloss in capitals. Now that's the information that VersaWorks needs, is a spot color with that name, that very specific name. And I've chosen a blue preview, it doesn't really matter what color you choose, so that on screen I can see all of the information that's going to be selected when I save this. So I'm going to select OK. Now if I turn off the RGB channels, the information that you see there on screen in black is what would come out as gloss information. So it's actually selected most of the green in the car, and it's got a little bit in the background as well. If I now save this, so let's go to Save As. We'll stick that on my desktop as car. Let's call it car gloss. As a Photoshop PDF file with the spot colors. And we'll just save that. Now I'm just going to jump over into VersaWorks to show you this. So if I now bring that into my LEF, car gloss, there it is. You should see under the special items that it's recognized the gloss information within the file. And if we open it up and we change this to special effects to look at the gloss information, it might be a little bit tricky to see on your screens, but there is actually a cyan crosshatch just where the car is here, showing me the data that it's selected as gloss. And then obviously I can choose whether I want to print that with matte varnish or gloss varnish or embossing as well. So that's how you can create data similar to the data that I created here for the lips, and here for this bark as well, to create proper textures for my images as well. Now, what you might have noticed in this file as well is on the right hand side, I've got 3 layers here. So let's just make these a little bit bigger if I can. No, it doesn't look like you've got loads to make those options a bit bigger for the layers panel, but I've got CMYK data as one. So let's just turn that one off. So now you can just see the gloss and matte data. Now I've split the gloss and matte data into two layers. So when exporting this file, you would need to split the export of the gloss and the matte data because they need to be printed in separate processes. VersaWorks sees gloss information just as the gloss spot color. So VersaWorks can choose whether it chooses that information to be a matte finish or a gloss finish. Now that sounds a little bit confusing, but it's easier to think of it as a clear spot color, and then VersaWorks chooses whether it's gloss or matte. So if I am having gloss and matte, what I need to do is turn one off and save one file, and then turn the other one off and turn the other one on, and save that as another file and bring that into VersaWorks. This is another reason why it's always really good to work in layers and name all of your layers if possible. So hopefully that gives you a good overview. I'm just going to show you a couple of other examples. Here's another file that I produced, which was for a beach resort example. And if I look at the different information by layers on the right hand side, we can see that this is to be printed onto a sheet of clear acrylic. So if we turn off every layer to start with, and we'll look at the back layer. So this one's called back CMYK. So this is to be printed onto the reverse side of the acrylic, so that you look through the acrylic and you see this image. On the back side of that color, I've actually created a gradient of white from the image, which means that when you look at the image, you'll see certain parts of it will stand out more than the rest because it will have more white ink behind it. So where you've got the sky here, for example, it's actually going to look quite see-through, which would look really nice when held up to the light. Then we've got the front side of the acrylic. So this is a multi-stage print where you print on the back side and the front side. The front side, we've got this CMYK data. And to go with that, we've got a layer of white ink, which is going to go behind all of the CMYK data. If I turn off this data and go to the matte layer, you can see that the outline for the logo is going to be my matte data, and the inside is going to be gloss. So this would need to be exported in multiple files for reverse printing, for front printing, and then for matte and gloss. If I turn them all on at the same time, you can see that there's all sorts of different bits of information here, which would be used when printing. So hopefully that all makes sense. So, and hopefully it's inspired you to use your gloss and white ink in a little bit more advanced ways. I've got a few other photos of examples of things to show you here as well. So let's have a look at some of these. So this is the texture library prints printed with multiple layers, just showing you that you can actually build up your layers across really quite extreme levels to be able to get really high prints. This is again a close-up of that print with the lips, and you can actually see all of the shiny emboss on the pink parts. This was the texture on the bark. So if we zoom in, you should be able to see all the raised embossed parts of that. And some other examples as well. So this is a really advanced multi-layer print. So you can see each of these little ridges of this image are actually 10 layers of gloss, and it was used to create a pyramid, just as an example to show you what's sort of possible. And on each layer is also a little layer of color, so that the color fades through the print as it raises. That's a side view of that print as well. This is a phone case with some gloss added to these little bubbles. And then these are just some other design examples of creating designs to fit onto certain objects. This is a white print printed onto clear acrylic again, just to show you that idea of creating a print using just the white data, which can look really neat. And this is another one where we split the information. Oops. So here you can see this was actually engraved into a sheet of corium and then CMYK data put onto the whole design apart from in the recess, and then gloss data put on the text. So again, you can see if you split your information and are a little bit smart in your print processes, you should be able to get some really interesting results. So, do we have any questions from anybody? I've kind of whizzed through quite a lot there, and it's actually already been an hour. So let's just go back into the presentation here and see if anybody has any questions, and I'll try and answer them if possible. If you do, just answer them in the chat box. And if you guys are interested in finding out more, a lot of the information is available on YouTube as well, on our YouTube channel. And obviously we have the Roland Academy here, where we have courses to help you guys advance your knowledge on all sorts of levels of design and using your printer as well. And we have the Creative Center, where we have lots of different examples. So just a moment, looks like there is a question over here. So bear with me a moment and we'll go to our chat Q&A. So, just a moment, let's have a look through these. So, first question, do you keep the gloss layers at 1 when using the gradient of a layer of gloss? Do you keep the gloss layers at 1? Do you mean in terms of where you layer the questions in that, Chris? Sorry, where you keep the layers, as in the gloss layer is at the first layer? Not quite sure exactly what you meant with that question there. Do you keep the gloss layers at 1 when using the gradient of a layer of gloss? You could, in terms of putting your gloss layers, I always keep my gloss and white information on top of all the other layers. And then when you export it, obviously you can choose which order you print the gloss and the white data once you're in VersaWorks. So when you're keeping a gradient, you can keep it on top or underneath, but it's better to keep special information on top. So I hope that answers your question. I wasn't entirely sure what you meant there. And then from James, if building up the layers, does the printhead auto adjust the bed down, or do you have to allow for this when setting up the media? It depends on your device. So with the LEF range, it does not automatically adjust. So if you're doing lots and lots of layers, then what I would probably do is print my color first, if that was the order that you were going to be doing it. And then I would set print to do, maybe move my printhead down a bit and then set it to do my gloss in however many layers. So say we're doing 4 or 5 layers, that would be fine. If I was doing sort of 10 and above layers, and I then wanted to be able to do more print, so I'm doing another set of layers, I would then adjust the bed height myself. There is an option on the LEF in the menu panel for an auto down. So you could change the auto down for printing, but that just means it's going to scan the height and then move down for that individual print. So it's not the same as it auto adjusting each print. On the S series, the big flatbed and belt versions that we have, it does have a laser sensor that will, for multiple passes, will pass the laser sensor, so it would self-adjust a bit. So on some of the larger devices, it does have the feature. On some of the smaller devices, it doesn't. So that pyramid print that I did after each layer of 10, and then had to readjust the height of the bed. So I hope that answers your question. I will hang on here for another couple of minutes and ask any more questions. Answer any more questions, sorry, if anybody does. And if not, feel free to contact me after the webinar. and contact Roland or myself, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. So I'm just going to leave the microphone for a minute, but I will stay here and answer any more questions for a little while longer.